Welcome to the How Could You podcast. I'm Lauren Tocci.
And I'm Ryan Tocci. Lauren, you are still dangerous, but you can be my wing woman anytime.
Bullshit, you can be mine.
All right, and we're off to the danger zone.
Highway
Stop! I've told you, legally, we cannot keep singing. We don't have the funds or budget for it.
You get 30 seconds. I can sing 30 seconds of Danger Zone, Kenny Loggins.
This is why I'm the finance. I mean, you're just giving out Apple subscriptions last episode. You know.
I stand by it.
And we had takers on that, so I'm just like...
I know. Thank you for taking us up on our offer, and we hope that you're watching Coda. And if we haven't sent you payment yet, so sorry. Talk to my finance guy. Well, welcome, everyone.
I'm also playing legal team here as well, evidently.
It's like because I sound thirsty on every episode. Well, welcome to the episode, everyone. Obviously, we're going to be talking about Top Gun today, but before we get there, we have to say, so obviously, you know this is not coming out on our normal day. It's coming out on a Friday instead of a Tuesday, but we promise we have good reason. We have been spending our weekends working on an amazing film made by our friends, and we've been so excited about it, and it's been very, very happily taking up some of our time.
Yeah, it was great. We got to team up with Jardin Films, and they're making a really nice passion project short film, and that was an extremely rewarding experience that I know we both really loved it. What an amazing team to work with. I know if you guys were following our social media pages, we were putting up some stuff looking for extras, and we appreciate everybody coming out, and it was a really great experience, worth being a little delayed on this episode for, because after the last weekend, it was a little tired. We were a little tired.
Well, here's the really beautiful thing about watching a film being made. The hours are long, but they go so incredibly fast because it's just the whole of it is so fascinating. But then I would find myself, I'm like, I'm so energized by this, but now I am also so exhausted.
Right.
And it's just incredible. And honestly, just watching the talent and the vision of all parties involved with the filmmaking process was just incredible.
Yeah, complete props. Our cast is great. What a great group of people, and our director and writers, just amazing to work with. So yeah, excited about that little project.
Who doesn't want to spend their weekend hanging out with their friends on a film set? It's kind of like the dream, and you'll be hearing more about that dream in an upcoming episode.
Yeah, can't wait to tell you guys more about that.
So that's definitely our Tossi's tease for the episode, because we're obviously teasing something. Do you have a Tossi's take for this week?
I do, and like usual, I will be the weirdo over here that has to be like, I'm gonna pick the strange horror movie that's not for everybody. But
it definitely isn't.
But I'm gonna go with this week Ty West's film X, put out by A24. Just a really cool horror film. I think I described it as Texas Chainsaw Massacre meets Boogie Nights.
Yes.
And here's what I'm going to say to you audiences. If you don't like either of those movies, don't watch this, because it's not going to be for you. It's not a movie for everybody, but those who, are okay with a little, their sensibilities are a little more open, and, or you're into horror, it's a cool movie, really well acted. I love Mia Goth, who, I wasn't really sure where I stood with, but she just nails this, part. Ty West's direction of kind of harkening back to giving you a real 70s vibe. I mean, it really is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequel I've been waiting for. It's just a really great movie. A lot of suspense and horror, but also doesn't take itself too seriously. Grounds its story, though, at the same token. It's a really cool movie, and if you like that type of film, I really highly recommend it.
I really like that you describe this as your sensibilities have to be really open, because there's a point at which this movie hits a gear, and you've got to be really comfortable. And I think like what I love so much about A24 is it's becoming this like haven for innovation, in filmmaking style and storytelling techniques. And I think, it's branding itself really well in the market that I think people associate A24 with like the next edge of film and also like excellence. Like And this film 100% is that. Like, you're right, it completely harkens back, but it also in so many ways does very different things. There's a really interesting meditation on beauty and aging in this film that I think is like really important. It's great. And I walked away from the film going like, what just happened? And I had to sit with it for a while because I think you think I didn't like it at first.
I was a little worried.
Yeah.
It's an interesting film to see in the theater with people, I will say. And I'm glad you said that because there is something to really be said, and I think this is what I appreciate it. This movie on its surface, if you just watch it and you don't dive too deep, you're going to think it's one thing, but there's a lot more going on.
Yeah.
It's a lot deeper and has a lot more to say than what this film you would expect to. But then again, we go back to it's A24. Of course it is.
Well, and without a doubt, there's an aspect of going to see this film. It feels like a little bit of Travis Bickle and Taxi Driver. But it's not just that.
And you mean with the hand over your face, but open it. Yes, agreed.
Yes. My Tossi's takes is, well, it's twofold. One is film related, one is television related. So the film one is, if anyone wants to keep talking to me about the great incident at the Oscars, please do. I'm still very much living in that moment. I just, every once in a while, my head just is like, woof, that happened. And I still want to talk about it. So if anyone wants...
We've moved on.
I haven't.
We've had 2 episodes.
I haven't.
The entire world has not stopped talking about it. It's time to move forward.
I refuse. I'm living in that space. My real Tossi's takes is, I have just been... I'm in love with Moon Knight. I think it's great. Listen, you and I, when we saw Inside Llewyn Davis, we're like, Oscar Isaac is like something else. Like this is an amazing performer. And so like, I'm very bought into his career. And the fact that he came over, like I tried to defend his like turn in like the X-Men movie, which is terrible, but like, but this is, I think, really interesting. I know nothing about that character. I know nothing about the backstory, so I'm really just letting it be revealed to me through this series, and I'm loving it. I think it's great.
I'm glad you picked the Disney Plus TV show, and I picked the, weird 70s, homage porn horror movie.
Literally, nothing has ever been so on brand for us.
Very true.
But speaking of porn, you've come here to talk about Top Gun. So if we can set the scene a little bit. So it's 1986. It's May.
What a pivot.
It's apropos. It's 1986. This film comes out late May, or I think like middle of May. So your start of your summer movie season. It's, billed as this kind of look into these top naval pilots in a program called Top Gun, directed by Tony Scott, who is Ridley Scott's brother, who, opened up this season for us. And this movie, at the heart of it, is about 2 really great friends, this highly competitive program, the egos that kind of ensue from that, the danger and the pressure of being in these highly specialized roles. It's something that feels like a big summer blockbuster film. It feels very 1980s. It's got just the most insane cast in the 80s. You've got Val Kilmer and Tom Cruise and Mike Ironside and Tom Skerritt. It's just, this is such a big film in so many ways to cover in terms of just like 80s culture.
I gotta be honest with you. When we were planning out season 4 of the How Could You podcast, I gotta be honest, in the, girth of things that we could have possibly, of all the films we picked, the fact that we got 2 Tom Skerritt films on our list is the last thing I would have thought would have happened.
Because, all right, first off, I can't let girth go by, given how our conversation has been. But second of all, the Tom Skerritt thing is interesting, because I feel like, we so talk about, like, Tom Hanks is like America's dad, right? But like Tom Skerritt for a time in my life was like the prototypical dad. Like, it's Tom Skerritt. Picket fences.
Did you not watch Poison Ivy?
No, I didn't watch Poison Ivy.
I don't think I've ever gotten, it's funny though, your brother definitely yelled at me after our Alien episode to say that Tom Skerritt is not a that guy. And anybody that was in Top Gun is not a that guy.
I was on that text message thread. he was hella pissed at you.
He was.
And he had every right to be. And I should have yelled at you during the episode.
I will take it back. Tom Skerritt is his own thing.
He's his own subgenre, is the Tom Skerritt subgenre with that fantastic mustache and that great gray hair.
I mean, this whole film has got mustache game is on point. I mean,
what is with you today?
Game.
Like, honestly, you're not allowed to talk about the movie X anymore. It is coding everything you say, and I don't even know how you're going to be when we get to the volleyball sequence. You may have to step out of the room. But I'll ask, so we're obviously talking about Top Gun today. What's your history with this film? When did you see it? How did you experience it? Do you love it?
Well, I was a young boy. And I put the VHS into the machine. No. I mean, I don't have, like, this great, like, total story of when I saw this the first time. I do have a really good story, though, of a really memorable time of seeing this movie. I mean, this movie was pure 80s. It came out, 86? So I was 6 years old. It's not like, but it was a huge thing in my household.
Did you guys
as it was with everybody, right?
Did you go see this in the theaters?
No. No, I did not see it then in the theater. I actually, when I was in 2000, I think was the first time I ever saw it in the theater.
Okay.
Actually, my friend John and I went, there was a midnight showing at our local mall, and we went and watched it. Which was cool to see it on the big screen. And that was back, it wasn't, like, you had to go to the midnight movies when they would play, occasionally, these older films. So that, I had a great time seeing that in the theater. The other love I have for this is there was a great NES game for, back in the day, which was one of my all-time favorite games. I was terrible at it, as I've probably talked on this show many times. I am terrible at video games. I love video games, but I'm terrible at them.
That Top Gun game was not easy.
Oh, yeah. I just put it on and you would get the score playing, yes. And then the afterburners were yeah, very cool game. Always wanted to get to the end where they get to the the NASA, or not NASA, but the space shuttle that you had to bring down. I never saw it. I've never in all the years been able to see it. I could never figure out how to fuel on the game.
Which is a problem.
So yeah, it was definitely a problem. But that's my history with this. I want to hear your history. I have a feeling it's going to be different than mine, and may end up going a little bit back more to what I was talking about earlier.
So mine is entirely different. Well, one, I mean, this movie is very important to my birth, because it was the #1 movie at the box office the day I was born.
Yeah, I mean, a bona fide hit, this movie
yes, was. And because if you think about this, it comes out in middle May. My birthday is July 7th, which you obviously all know who are listening to this. So that's a long time to hold that spot.
So why didn't your parents name you Charlie?
I would have loved if they named me Maverick. Maverick Hausman? What a dope name. Maverick May Hausman really confused people. Obviously I didn't see, because, I was in utero, so I did not see this in theaters. My experience with this film is odd, and it's one of those great things that happens in your youth where you have no idea how it started, you just know it existed. Right. So a friend of mine, Kara, we would watch this at her house like every day after school for like 3 months and would quote it to each other. I have no idea why we did this. I don't know what, I have to think one day it started of let's watch Top Gun, and then it was let's watch it again. But it was like an obsessive thing. I watched this movie so many times, and the weirdest part of all of that is I remember that period in my life when we did that, and then I didn't watch it again until we just watched it to get ready for the episode, because we've never watched it together.
No, I don't think so.
And I realized there were stuff that I remembered lockstep in my mind and just stuff I forgot. Charlie's not in this movie as much as I remember her being in this movie. So that's my history with it, is just obviously, you know, the significance of my birth. And then obviously just weirdly, this became this thing that I watched obsessively in high school.
I think that's what makes this movie so interesting is because it's so well known. It's so and I think the fact it's a very accessible movie. So most people can really watch it. At most ages can really watch it. And it kind of keeps hitting generational, decade after decade. You were talking about that with your friend. I remember my soccer team, we were getting our jackets for the end of the season, and a bunch of the players all decided they were going to get instead of their name on it, they were giving each other, call names from Top Gun. So,
oh, that's great.
Yeah.
No, wait, did they use the call signs from Top Gun?
Yeah,
or
they were giving out to each other. So somebody was Maverick, somebody was Viper, somebody was.
You were Goose, weren't you?
I actually was not involved, which I don't know what that says.
We can talk about that too, Ryan.
That was my own wild card. That's my own Maverick.
I feel like wild card would actually be your call sign. Mine would be megaphone for obvious reasons. So, you talked about the accessibility of this film. There are, I think, so many things that kind of make this film a classic, something that people come back to, and that's that gets referenced a lot. And I think one of the markers of this, without a doubt, is how, although it's not the scenes that people, I think, speak the most about, how all of the flight sequences are filmed. They're clear. I understand the positioning of the planes. And that way, in so many ways, it is kind of a technical achievement because, certainly how it's filmed is really incredible. You feel like you're very much inside those cockpits. You very much feel like you're in flight with them. It's not the thing that most people mark this film for, but it's the thing that probably should be talked about the most with it.
I don't know. It is an hour and 50-minute naval recruitment movie.
Naval recruitment went up 500% after the film. They actually had Navy recruiters stationed outside of the film to get people to sign up as they were coming out. We're not condoning this behavior. We're just saying it existed.
Well, they said, 90% of the recruits that they talked to had seen this movie.
I'm not shocked by that because there's an energy surrounding the notion of, and look, we will certainly be playful with some aspects of the film, but the notion of the kinship that is shared amongst these pilots, the kind of the striving for excellence, that I can understand why it's somewhat attractive. And I think there are so many things we talk about with movies where you walk away and when you are an adolescent, you're kind of I want to do that. I want to be that. And you play pretend at it. But I also see how it can be a very convincing thing of going, if it's all beach volleyball and singing in a bar with my buds, sign me up for it. And it's one of the things that I think is interesting because Matthew Modine, friend of the podcast, would not take a part in this movie because he felt it glorified war.
I was actually excited to talk about some casting, for what ifs, I guess. Yeah, I saw that too. Which is ironic because he then, not ironic, but he ends up actually taking Full Metal Jacket, which is probably his big break.
But that doesn't glorify war.
Well, right. Kubrick had made a couple of really great war films, but they were all very anti-war films. So it makes sense that Modine, especially Full Metal Jacket, is a hugely anti-war, anti-Vietnam film.
Well,
so
I don't think anyone's coming out of that film going, that's the life. But I think this film, the music, how it's shot, just general attractiveness of the actors who are in it. They're all incredibly fit and they look like movie stars because so many of them go on to be, incredibly large movie stars.
Yeah, and we're talking a lot here about the fact of how it's hard not to talk about this movie without discussing how influential the government was with this movie, for better or worse. However, the Navy ends up essentially making their 1987 Join the Navy commercials with Danger Zone music and using Top Gun-esque shots in it to essentially recruit. And then the big thing was the fact that this movie looks so amazing is because they had such access with the Navy, and they actually had 3 different, naval carriers that they used or were working with, and the Pentagon let them have a great deal of access. But the Pentagon also had a huge influence on the script. They were allowed to go in and essentially say what was allowed in and what wasn't.
Well, and one of the most major tweaks of this is obviously Goose's death.
Right.
Goose was supposed to die in a midair crash. The Navy said no, because they said they marked it as two things. One, obviously, the idea here being that if it's a midair crash, then there's something like negligent that happened, or something unskilled that happened. They also said it wasn't plausible that during this type of training exercise that mistake would be made. They said there's so much training to avoid that, that they had to do something different that would explain like Goose's death. And which is interesting. And also you talk about that unprecedented access, having access to the materials like alone obviously led to one of the major casting gets for this. Tom Cruise did not initially want to do this film, but they took him up in a fighter jet. He came down and said he would do it. That's amazing. And you can imagine Tom Cruise just jumping around and being like, this is the greatest thing ever. Of course I'm going to go up and I think the guy probably really thought he was Maverick, which fine, because he embodies it so well.
What's funny, too, is my understanding is he actually got sick on that first flight.
Yes.
And Bruckheimer, so, Jerry Bruckheimer, who's one of the major producers with Don Simpson on this, he ends up, when he gets off, he's worried. But yeah, you're right. He immediately goes to it. And I was going to wait for this later, but I do have to ask, because you're talking about Cruise and everything. There were a few other people that were in the running for it. So I just have to ask, for a little fun.
Sure.
If any of these other people you could see play this role.
All right, hit me with them.
Matthew Modine, I have to ask. Do you think Matthew Modine, his politics aside, do you think he could have pulled off this part?
Okay, here's why not.
Okay.
So there is a similar cockiness to the Loudon Swain character, but here's the difference with the Loudon Swain character. There's like a sensitivity, dweebishness. Yes. I'm going to invent that word, dweebishness, that, I'll say nebbish. That's an actual word. Thing to Matthew Modine that really provides heart to the Loudon Swain character. Maverick can't have that. Maverick, you have to believe, not only does he believe himself to be the best, but actually at the heart of it, he is the best pilot. You have to buy it. And Tom Cruise, I can believe, is the best at anything when he's playing those parts.
Yes. I don't disagree. So I'm almost going to... Scott Baio.
No, absolutely not. Joni loves Chachi. No, thank you.
Now, Scott Baio was actually offered the role. Allegedly by producers. And he had actually turned it down.
Oh gosh, is there an alternate reality where Scott Baio is Tom Cruise famous? No. It doesn't have Scientology behind it.
And we'll get to Tom Cruise and why I'm no. But some other people that were in very big consideration, John Travolta.
Okay.
He ends up, they actually decide not to go with him because he had a bad string of films. He was just coming off of Staying Alive and some things like that. Michael J. Fox, but again, his schedule was problematic.
Yeah. Because he's still filming Family Ties at this point, right?
Right, yeah. And he ends up going on to do another war film, Casualties of War, which is a very hard watch. But I could actually see him in this role. It's interesting, but Tom Hanks.
Aww, but no.
Which I feel like pretty much any 80s. Sean Penn. I actually could really see Sean Penn.
I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
I actually think I even buy the Maverick character more as Sean Penn. No one can play Maverick but Tom Cruise. Let me just say that firmly before anyone in our audience freaks out. But Sean Penn, I could see that and I would believe it.
Okay, and then this is the cool story I have to say.
I actually think Sean Penn makes a better foil to Iceman.
Oh yeah, yes, I agree. And I am not the hugest Sean Penn fan, but I could totally see him in that role. Patrick Swayze, who was actually offered the part, and they pushed for him, but he ends up turning it down to make Dirty Dancing. Oh, good, yay!
Okay, so my childhood restored. Well, here's the thing, though. Again, Patrick Swayze. Really could see it. Yeah. I think he'd be great as Maverick, but obviously selfishly, I want him just where he ended up.
And then the funny part of that is, Tom Cruise is offered the lead in Ghost.
Absolutely not.
And ends up turning it down, and Patrick Swayze takes it. So in an alternate universe, we have Crazy for Swayze as Maverick, and Cruise doing the pottery with Demi Moore.
Absolutely not. No, like, and listen, I'm not like anti-Tom Cruise. I don't want that sentiment to come across that way, but no one else can play that part but Patrick Swayze.
He just, like, listen, there's a lot of things, like, wackiness with Tom Cruise that we've seen over the years, but the guy he's cool on screen. Like, he just has a way, and that's not taking away a lot of these other actors that we talked about. There's just, Maverick had to have this just suave, like, he owned a room, and Cruise has that, and he plays it in this role.
Tom Cruise, I mean, it's that, that 1,000 kilowatt smile is like, it's impossible not to be drawn into his performances, whatever they are. And I'm saying from his stuff in the 80s on, like, and, as he gets into more, like, serious fare, like, later on, like, although obviously there's some serious parts to Top Gun, but, like, I would say there's just something about it. He has that movie star quality. Like, I can't even necessarily put my finger to it except to say, I don't know, Tom Cruise is, like, impossible not to want to watch. And, like, I think about, like, this time, like, I take this, or, like Cocktail. I love the movie Cocktail. Like, and you're going to sit down and watch Cocktail at some point, just I'm letting you know this, because it's a big how could you for you. There's just, and I think about, like, those two parts, there's just a similar charm. The characters are totally different, but there's just a charm to Tom Cruise that's, like, that, like, undefinable thing that makes him such, like, a solid celebrity, and, like, why he's had such, like, a vast career.
He is. Cruise, I have to say, I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, and I apologize, and I hope that's okay.
No, it's fine.
But we're talking about, like, him getting cast in this role, and it's not that he, again, had a huge, mountain of film roles. I think this really is what puts him into the stratosphere of being a star.
It is.
Because he's got Taps, The Outsiders, Risky Business, which is ultimately what makes him a star, obviously.
Of course.
And then he All the Right Moves, which is very, very well remembered. And then he has Legend, which is a complete bomb.
Yeah.
And then Top Gun. But then he runs off a bunch of films that is just, I forget how amazing Cruise was. I mean, Top Gun, Color of Money, Cocktail, Rain Man, Born on the 4th of July, Days of Thunder, Far and Away, A Few Good Men, The Firm, Interview with a Vampire, The First Mission Impossible, which, remember how long those movies have been going on.
Yeah.
Jerry Maguire, Eyes Wide Shut, Magnolia, Mission Impossible 2, Vanilla Sky, and Minority Report.
Yeah.
That's all his films in a row. And then he hits Last Samurai, and from there we start getting into the Cruise, I want to be an action star, I'm really trying to...
Like, I'm going to hang off the side of a plane, yeah.
But, oh my God, is that a string of, like, undefeated films? It's amazing. Absolutely.
Well, and the thing is, it's one of those things I think sometimes we can take for granted of, like, going, like, well, yeah, of course Tom Cruise is, like, one of the most, like, famous celebrities, like, of the modern era.
Right.
And, of course, it's Tom Cruise. But the thing is, like, when you start having to list in order how those films came out, you're like, well, there's not a bad performance or bad film really in the bunch. You have such a streak of incredible films, which is what can kind of explain, if you're following Cruise now, like why people, like, will just show up for films, even if they're like, I'm not the biggest fan of Jack Reacher, but I don't know, it's Tom Cruise. Well, It's like, yeah, it's because of that string of films. Do you have a favorite in that bunch?
Well, yeah, you probably know my favorite.
It's Magnolia, right?
No, it's Eyes Wide Shut.
Oh, yeah, oh my gosh, I'm not even thinking.
Which, obviously, if you're talking about one that maybe doesn't get as much, is probably that. So that's a very personal hit to me.
He's so charming in that movie.
Absolutely
So charming.
phenomenal. And what about you? You have a favorite?
I think I've already shown my hand a little bit that I'm a huge fan of Cocktail. And in that lineup, it's, certainly Eyes Wide Shut would definitely be up there. Magnolia.
Not Interview? Oh, sorry.
I was getting there.
Sorry.
So here's the thing with Interview with the Vampire. If we ever did an episode about that, I think like 30 minutes of the episode would be the casting indecision that leads to Tom Cruise playing that part. He is a phenomenal Lestat. I love that book series so deeply, and he really, when he returns from the dead and threatens Claudia, is just like the most sinister thing ever. But probably like Cocktail, but I don't know, like, Also, Top Gun. He's so great in Top Gun. Like, he, and so, like, thinking about, obviously, the film that we're here to talk about, and, like, thinking about, like, just from the moment you meet him, there's something so, like, engaging. Like, I would say the opening of this film, there's already something immediately engaging. Like, you have that great black screen with kind of the history of, like, what you're supposed to watch, or what you're going to be watching, this, like, elite school, the lost art of aerial combat. Like, it feels so weighty.
That score is so good.
I won't hum it, but and
then you have that
so
unassuming title card.
It's just Top Gun. Okay, right. Like no, like
just plain white letters
on a black background. Whatever font came standard with the program. And then you have just like. There's something great about the intercutting of, like, the command center. I love that everybody's sweaty, because of course you would be. This is very tense. I know that's, like, the weirdest thing to point out, but I, like, literally wrote my notes, like, everyone's sweaty all the time in this movie.
I was going to say, though, and I am obviously not a military person. I don't know, and somebody definitely listening probably is going to go, no, it feels like a lot of sweat. Like, everybody is red in the face and a lot of sweat.
I think this was the Navy's way of getting funding for air conditioning. So, like, people would be generally concerned. Although I think Tom Cruise sweats less than everyone else, which makes sense because of Dianetics. But you have that, you have the first time he says, "Talk to me, Goose." Just like probably the quote line for weirdly we quote the most from this.
Yes.
You have this opening flight sequence. It's so impressive. And you have, I think, like a great distillation of Maverick's character. He is top of his game. He's playful, he's confident, he enjoys what he's doing. But he's not someone devoid of empathy, because when you have the incident with Cougar and Cougar panics, he disobeys an order to be able to go help Cougar land safely. Like, and his commanding officer is so angry about this. But what it shows about Maverick is it's not just about breaking the rules to make himself look great. He also has like an empathy and an understanding for that pressure and going, I think there's almost this, although he never says this to anyone, like there's like it could have been me that happened to. I don't think it would happen to Maverick. That's how the character is kind of built in his mythos, but also that he has a kinder heart and maybe a gentler hand than necessarily the program allows.
Well, but we do get a little bit of that in Maverick. I mean, later on, after the the death, and he struggles up there. So,
but I also think though that is so easy to relate why it's happening, whereas this guy, it's just he cracks under the pressure. And I imagine from everything they give you at the beginning of the film, and I like that the film starts that way with someone's, and I don't even want to say failure, because it doesn't really feel like a failure, it just feels like the pressure of the job is to let you know, like, no, there are people who are really good at this that can't follow through because this has such intense weight, and it's so intensely dangerous. It adds like a real sense of like tension right at the beginning of the film.
Agreed. Cougar, played by John Stockwell, who was the director of Blue Crush. Just want to drop that in there.
Oh my gosh, I just recently found that, and by recent research for the episode, and I was like, I don't know why, but I find that incredibly fascinating.
I do like that this is put up at the front, because, I mean, we made a lot of comments about the Pentagon getting involved with the script and things like that, but it does show the weight of what these pilots have to go through right off the top. The pressure, the stress, the PTSD of it all. And I think that was extremely important. And it also plays, again, like we talked about, really heavy later in the film as well, down the stretch with aspects.
But I also, as we talked about at the beginning with the Navy being so intensely involved with this, I wonder if there's purposefulness to that too, of like, yeah, there's a lot of this that's going to make it seem kind of glamorized, but also there's an aspect of like, but understand what this is. Like, and I love, what I love about this sequence too is there's nothing like sterile about these spaces. They make these spaces look like as badass as possible, because like the command center is all like bathed in like blue and red tone lighting. It's not like sterile, like there's such an intensity, such a lean into all of this. So there is something, again, that's being done with like the production design and how this is filmed to make you feel like you're in those spaces with them, not distant and observing, but like as though you're kind of within the simulation. And again, you talked about the score, like that synth is so fantastic. It's like, it immediately sets your body in a good way on edge. Like, again, that kind of like leaning in that happens, and you get one of the great lines from the film. your ego is writing checks your body can't cash. Like, who just flies off with that? Like, who has that locked and ready to go?
You know, we're doing this nostalgia series at the Civic Theater. Little drop there, a little plug. But one of the things I keep coming back to is what makes a movie nostalgia. Like, right? Like, what are the things? And it's, you need to have very quotable movie. You need to have great soundtrack. You need to have memorable characters. And that's what makes this movie so such a classic. It's because it has all that. Like, you talk about it. Like, how many quotable great lines are in this movie are just nail it. And right from the get-go.
Yeah. And then, like, and you know, the great thing is like, we don't spend a whole heck of a lot of time in Maverick and Goose's backstory. We're just kind of given their friendship and accepting it, like, right from the beginning. But they build it so genuinely immediately that I'm like, I know the dynamic of this friendship right away. I understand who you are in each other. And I also understand from the beginning, which makes it so much worse at the end, that you guys are remarkably close. Yeah. Even for flight partners.
And a huge credit to obviously the whole cast, but especially Tom Cruise and Anthony Edwards, that they are just have a great bond and chemistry.
Yes, yeah.
And like you said, like instantly, you know that these are two brothers, you know, two best friends, just their family, you know, that found family and just that connection. And that's a huge, and like you said, we don't need a lot of backstory because we get it all right in the beginning, and we don't really need a whole lot more. To know who each of them are as individuals and who they are as a pair.
And then also who they're going to be by the time they get to the, like, Top Gun. Like, when they arrive. And, like, I just have to say, so much masculine energy in one room. You got Michael Ironside and Tom Skerritt and Val Kilmer and Tom Cruise and Anthony Edwards. I'm going to say big masculine energy. That great mustache. Like, when you're sitting in that space, it's just like, whew.
Anthony Edwards, to me, is a comfort actor. Like, you know, he comes on screen, and I feel comforted by him.
Dr. Green,
yeah. I mean, you know, but any role he's in, like, there's just a comfort to that actor being on screen.
Well, and I think, you know, the thing that's, like, scores that, of course, is, like, he's not just, like, comic relief. I think he's also, like, the most, like human one of the pilots. Like, there's something about him that immediately feels warm and relatable. You get the sense that it's kind of hard for anyone not to like Goose. Like, even if they kind of are like, oh god, Maverick thinks he's the best, they're probably like, yeah, but Goose is really nice. Like, you get the sense that those conversations happen, and you get, like, there's a real playful, like, energy to a lot of these sequences where the pilots are together, like, and you know, and as I think we've kind of already hinted at, certainly we'll talk about the volleyball scene, like a real, like, kind of like teasing, playful, even maybe a little bit like sexual, like, way in which, like, the humor is played, like, throughout these sequences. There's such a sense of, like, sizing each other up, but it's, like, not bitter or, like, harsh where it feels uncomfortable in these sequences. It's like you kind of almost want them, like, maybe fight a little bit. I don't know. It kind of also feels like you're flirting a little bit too. I kind of enjoy this. Like,
all you remind me of is Quentin Tarantino when he talks about this movie.
I'm with Quentin Tarantino as he talks about this movie, because there's, like, I don't know, there's something, like, and part of this is done. We'll get to the volleyball sequence, and I can cover this, but, you know, you get that great bar sequence.
Well, before that, though, we have another iconic shot.
What?
Well, we get Highway to the Danger Zone in that motorcycle ride, right?
It's, like, pretty great.
You know, when you go through the flip book of this movie, you can't dismiss that, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I read where Tom Cruise actually had to learn how to drive a motorcycle for this role, which doesn't surprise us at this point. But,
and I totally believe he would do it, and it's like, you know, and it's all there's all those little things, like, I genuinely buy into that Maverick rides a motorcycle everywhere he goes, that Maverick rocks those aviator shades better than anyone in the room.
Ray-Bans went up 40% or something like that after this movie.
The whole movie is a target-rich environment. Yeah. Like, right. It's just, I mean, it is, like, really attractive actors looking, like, cool as anything. I wrote, like, in my notes when we were, like, watching this, I'm like, oh man, is there, like, anyone better than Tom Cruise in the 80s? Like, he's the smoothest dude in any room.
One could argue Val Kilmer.
Val Kilmer, yeah.
I mean, is there a cooler character than Iceman.
Because he's, like, positioned as a villain, but you have to love him, too.
Oh, yeah. I don't think he's a villain at all,
Well, he's, like, the adversarial foil to, like, Maverick.
Well, it is the really interesting part of this movie, right?
But also, I don't know.
We love Maverick. Everybody's a huge Maverick fan. But you can argue that... And I don't think the movie's never like hiding this, but like everybody else seems to be right. Like Maverick, we know, is essentially the best.
Yes.
But what makes him the best is also what cost him to be the best, right? Like it's the cockiness, the brashness, where like I think Ice is exactly what they said. Like he is just, you know where he is right on the surface. Like he is just complete even.
But I also think, though, there is an aspect of Maverick, again, and I'm going to, like, circle back to, like, so we talked about, like, how he helps Cougar, but I also think, like, when they're talking about Cougar in the bar sequence, he makes a point to say, still is a good man. Like, Maverick does not have to tear anyone down or belittle anyone's abilities to know he's the best in the room, because he just knows he's the best in the room. And I think that's what makes him the best.
The best of the top 1% of naval fighters. Yeah,
yes.
I mean...
I do love when they drop those statistics. I do love that phenomenal, like, bar sequence of him, like, approaching Charlie. And it's a great little Easter egg, too, because Charlie is there with, like, someone who's, like, older.
Yeah, you know,
Yes. So...
Perry is this character's name, I believe.
Yeah, yes. So Perry is his character's name. His name in real life is Pete Pettigrew, which freaks me out as a Harry Potter fan. But he's the actual Viper. Like, he's who Viper was based off of. And so, like, it's a little fun thing that they drop in, but also adds to the authenticity, knowing that there were so many of those guys on set.
Yeah, he was the technical advisor. So he was a naval aviator and flight instructor, and then he was their technical advisor, and he had the Viper, call name, and yeah, they used it.
Yeah, but it also adds to, like, and I would imagine there has to be some influence of, like, the type of convivial atmosphere that this should be, that, like, yeah, you're all competing, and you all know you're the best, and you're also all singing in the bar together, because that's just what you do, and, like, and that's kind of the atmosphere around it, so you have to think that that's, like...
The bar that still exists in San Diego, California. Kansas City Barbecue on Harbor Drive in San Diego. One of our great regrets of missed film locations.
I'm so upset. I may make us go to San Diego this summer just so we can go.
Let's go.
I know, I believe that you will. Just to go to that bar, because it's just, that's such a great, I want to live in that space. But if someone doesn't sing You've Lost That Love and Feeling to me, I'm going to be real disappointed.
It is sad, though. They had a bad fire a few years back and lost a lot of the memorabilia that they had, unfortunately. So,
well, let's bring this conversation back up and talk about the volleyball sequence then. I mean... What can be said about the volleyball sequence?
That hasn't been said?
They're shirtless, but like in jeans with their dog tags on. They're all oiled up. It's just, so this is actually, what I appreciate about this is there is some like intentionality by Tony Scott, and he's been very open about this, like how he wanted this whole entire sequence filmed. This is actually based off of the work of a photographer by the name of Bruce Weber, who did like a lot of these really beautiful glamour shots of like hyper masculine like bodies, and like and they are I don't want to say scandals because I'm not scandalized by body, but they are like meant to be pretty alluring like photos. You can Google them if you like, and they were the basis for how he shot this sequence. Like he looked at those photos and he went, that's what I want it to feel like. He's like, look at this cast. Like, they're all ridiculously attractive. Like, Tony Scott said this, and he's like, yeah. And he used some terminology to, like, talk about what he wanted the sequence to kind of look like and feel like. And he essentially just took the camera and was like, just keep playing and I'm going to keep shooting. Like, and that's how this, and I only bring that up because that scene is so oft talked about in relation to this film.
Yeah.
But I also like that the thing that most people will say about it, there is something kind of vaguely erotic about this sequence, that Tony Scott's like, I mean, yeah, that's what I was going for.
Well, one of my favorite songs of the entire film, which is Playing with the Boys by Kenny Loggins, playing.
Even the title! Come on!
It's a great, iconic scene. And yeah, but it's a testament to Tony Scott. Like, he knows how to shoot a film and get the most out of all the light that you have coming in, and get the most out of your actors and every aspect of them.
Well, and also get them in a space where they can feel so playful with each other. Something that I really loved is they talked about this, like, essentially, like, this whole entire set was a party, like, and they would go out on the town together, and that was, like, very real, and they were all very playful and hung out with each other, except for one piece of this. If the cast was going out, they either got Val Kilmer or Tom Cruise with them, never the both at the same time, because they both wanted to be so committed to the tension that they went, if only one of us can go out with you. And it's not because they didn't like each other, but they said they were like, they had to commit to it, which I love.
I do like that. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Because I like when you hear about that method acting and everything.
Well, and I also...
And it plays on the thing. There is the two of them play off of each other so well. It is one of the best rivalries put on film.
Because it's one of... And it has such a wonderful fruition, which is what we quoted at the beginning of the episode. But you're right, because there is a sense of, like, tension and admiration and also, like, fascination with each other, and, like, there's a sense of how they play these characters that they're both acutely aware of the tension that comes from them both being so good at this. Like, you have that great moment where they're in the locker room and he goes, "That's right, I am dangerous." And Iceman just bites at him. Like, so unnecessary with those beautiful teeth.
A bite feels quotable, right?
It does! Because who doesn't immediately want to do that when you hear that line? And, like, he grabs him. Like, it's just so good. But I have to ask about something, because this would follow up the volleyball sequence. We get, like 20 minutes with Charlie. Is this the most unnecessary part of the movie?
Well, reading about it, it's interesting. Yes, I'm going to say yes. And it's nothing against Kelly McGillis, who plays, Charlie great.
And she does a great job.
She does a really good job. It's funny, we were talking about the volleyball scene. I always remember that scene being longer, and I actually thought it was in two parts. Like, I thought there was... So I completely had, for some reason, misremembered that. And then I misremember... the love story in this, that essentially the love story takes place over, like you said, 20 minutes of the movie, just plopped in the middle of the film.
The movie comes to such a screeching halt, but the weird thing is, I remembered this much more intercut throughout the movie than just in this 20-minute chunk, and then I was watching, I'm like, this all just happens now, and some of that...
Take My Breath Away plays, I think, underscored for 20 minutes.
Yes, because there's that synth pop version, then there's the real version, then there's an instrumental version, and I think that, part of this is, they did add a lot of this in. In fact, if you look during the scene when... on the elevator. The scene in the elevator, and then the lovemaking scene, her hair is a different... length, so they had to tie her hair up. Also, Tom Cruise's hair is longer in the scene at her house than it is in the rest of the film. It's, very subtle, but they had to film it all in shadows. And this is something that was, requested, add more to the love story. And I actually think... I don't think it does a disservice to the film necessarily, but it does kind of halt the progress for a while, and then their relationship doesn't feel very weighty in the end, so it feels odd that so much time is taken for that.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what you said. I believe probably the first cut of this is exactly what it is. She's kind of just a flame with him, that they have a connection, but it's not really supposed to be a love story. And then what ends up happening is the test audiences doesn't sound like they really understood the purpose, so they wanted more, and in which case, when they went back to editing, then they had to cut these other scenes in, and Tony Scott just went, all right, well, we're going to put it all at one spot.
Well, and part of that is the test audience asked for that.
Right.
They're like, well, we don't see them get together. And I was like, well, no, because it's kind of implied, she's, she's a really important feminine scientific energy in this space of, essentially flyboys and, big masculine energy.
It also makes sense, too, because Charlie's character changed from the original script.
Yes.
She was originally supposed to be a gymnast.
Yes.
That he met.
And the reason they changed this is because in part of the pre-production, they came across a naval analyst by the name of Christine Fox, call sign Legs, great call sign, and they changed the nature of the character because they wanted to, honor her experience and bring that into the space, which I think is a really cool inclusion and an important inclusion. It's just the problem is there's something kind of ham-fisted about their love story. Their foreplay is really weird. He, talks about both of his dead parents, before, like when they're in the space where you think they're gonna hook up and then they don't. Like,
yeah, but you and I are both in the Dead Parents Club, and like that is kind of a you kind of lead with that sometimes when you meet people. Like, this is what this now has structured my life.
You're not wrong. I'm gonna transition real hard out. As true as it may be. But, and I think because to me, it is highlighted by the fact you get the true love story of the movie. You get Carol and Goose.
Oh, gosh, right?
Meg Ryan at her Meg Ryaniest. Hey, Goose, you big stud! Like, just...
Meg Ryan's, like, I believe, first film role.
Yes.
She was coming off a bunch of TV roles at this point.
Yeah, and here's the problem. I love that scene so much. I love their interactions. I love how much she loves Maverick. You get the sense that, like, she honors their friendship so deeply. You also get the sense that, like, Maverick is a part of her family. Like, she looks to him like he is a brother. He is part of them. And the problem is I always really love this scene and then immediately get sad because I know what is so closely coming on the heels of this sequence.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely play with her emotions. I mean, you put Goose's kid, you put how much in love they are, you show how much she cares about Maverick. I mean, yeah, it's such a setup to just break your heart very shortly after. And
like, here's the thing, I would have been sad about Goose's death whenever and however it happened, but it's rougher because it's like, again, it's those stark realities of like, they have family at home that they really love. And when they die, there are going to be people mourning them outside of their flight family.
Yeah.
It's rough.
I understand the purpose, but does it have to happen?
No, it doesn't.
Right.
Goose doesn't have to die.
This is as much a unnecessary as killing off Apollo Creed and Rocky IV. Like, yes. We love these characters. You don't need to kill them off to give us the emotional weight of the rest of the film.
Truly, honestly, it's one of the few character deaths in a film that as I approach it, I'm still like, maybe they'll do it different this time, please. Because, like, you get, and it's this weird, like, juxtaposition. You have that sequence. You have then Michael Ironside explaining again, like, the points position, as I'm going to call it. Like, and so you're back in, like, the game portion of, like, the flying, and then for that death, and that death is brutal, dude. Like, it is not, oh, well, we see a crash and maybe. Like, you see him hit.
Yeah.
The shit, like, it's bad.
So, and I have to talk about the fact of, Viper, is he the worst after this? Like, everybody's just like, all right, Maverick, you gotta move on. You gotta let him go.
Viper is, like, a horrifying human being in the wake of this. And I think you're supposed to understand this, like, he's trying to get him, like, help him through, but I'm like, that's not helpful. You're just, like, completely denying his trauma and experience.
Yeah,
like,
everybody's just like, move on. And I'm like, I think even Charlie at some point is kind of like, well, you gotta move on.
She does. And listen, like, I get there's a harsh reality to that, but also it feels in a narrative film about not real people and a really great performance by Anthony Edwards, a little harsh.
Right, and I agree. I think, obviously, those who are in the military, and I'm sure that there is probably a lot of really unfortunate and sad truth to that. Anybody that is in a job or a profession that is so incredibly dangerous as this, I'm sure that there is more to that there is a little bit of that you have to be able to bounce back, sadly.
Well, and if you look at, like, the sequence that comes after this, like, the first time he flies again, and he flies with Sundown, and when they land, Sundown's mad. He's like, you could have taken the hit or taken the shot, and there's this, like, interaction between them. And you realize, like, part of this is there has to, unfortunately, I think there has to exist somewhat of that. You have to keep moving on. But it's also hard because, these are training exercises. Like, this isn't combat. So, like, it's a harsh point in the movie. And then the movie has to try and recover from it.
Well, before we even say that, though, there is something, though, like, we do have the time to touch base with. Yeah. Is there was actually, I mean, and which shows how incredibly dangerous this, these pilots are in this flight is there was actually a death on set, and the film is dedicated to that individual,
Art Scholl, correct? Yeah.
Right, correct. Who unfortunately intentionally put it into a spin and unfortunately was never able to get it out of the spin. So it's, obviously, there is such a danger in this, and that speaks to, obviously, pilots. It also speaks to stunt people. It speaks to a lot of aspects of things, but I think it is something that's, we have to recognize in the, the making of this film.
Well, and I think that's, why I think maybe and that might justify why there's such a brevity to those lighter moments. Like, when we all think about Top Gun, we think about, I feel the need for speed, and we think about the volleyball sequence, and we think about Take My Breath Away, and we think about, Iceman and Maverick's, tension. But the reality of the film is actually, no, this is kind of a hard look at, what the costs are for mistakes in this line of work.
Right.
And the fact that you do have, a death that happened on set, and the fact that you do have so many, members of the Navy and Navy personnel who are involved in the filmmaking of this, I have to think that's part of it. Yeah, there's aspects of this that are glamorous, but I don't know why watching it now, maybe, obviously, maybe age is a factor, maybe just different perspective, or because we were watching and taking notes, which is never something I've done during Top Gun before. I was noticing all that stuff different. One of the things I wrote down about the Merlin character, which is played by Tim Robbins, is Tim Robbins is freaking out in the way that I would exactly expect Tim Robbins to be freaking out in an airplane, but it's also this wait, you're in this top school too, dude, but he's kind of freaking out. There's all of these markers, I think, at the end of the film that, speak to the reality of these positions.
I give the film a lot of credit, too, that you don't have the recovery of Maverick in time to win the Top Gun prize, that it ends up still going to Iceman. But also, the Top Gun award is not actually a real award.
Well, that feels weird then that they added that in.
Yeah, right. Also, fun fact in the you are not allowed to quote Top Gun.
Oh, seriously?
You get fined $5. I mean, that's the urban legend, that you get fined $5 if you caught quoting Top Gun while in the school.
You have to do it once, right? Just to see what happens, or maybe you don't do that at the Naval Academy. Probably not at Top Gun school. I don't know if it's called Top Gun school. I'm just going to call it Top Gun.
Yeah, it was originally the U.S. Navy Fighter Weapons School. Once it left San Diego, it actually now in Nevada, or at least as of 96 was in Nevada, and then that changed, the name changed actually to the U.S. Navy Strike Fighter Tactics Instructor.
Rolls off the tongue just like Top Gun.
Yeah, but either way, if you're in that school, do not.
Do not quote Top Gun, as tempting as it may be. So we've been talking about a lot of aspects of the filmmaking, what went into the production of this, the actors, director Tony Scott. Are you a fan of his other works? I am
a huge Tony Scott fan.
Well, honestly, look at this list. Domino, Man on Fire, Enemy of the State, Crimson Tide, True Romance, Days of Thunder, and The Hunger.
He legitimately did not make a film I didn't like.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
It's a
great director. Man on Fire would be my favorite.
Yeah.
This back end of his career, he kind of makes films in the very same style. He's a little bit more stylized, a little bit different, but once he hits Man on Fire, he finds this kind of voice of his, and he kind of sticks with it with Domino and Deja Vu, Taking of Palm 1, 2, 3, and Unstoppable, all kind of have that same kind of vibe, quick, frantic pacing to it, and editing to it.
Kind of started with Enemy of the State. He started playing around with that styling that film.
Agreed. But yeah, not a bad film. Sadly, we lost him a few years ago, but just an amazing director, and seemed like a really interesting dude. He actually wasn't, allegedly Cronenberg and Carpenter were up for directing this. I can't see either. I don't know if that's...
I just imagine Carpenter being so cranky with, the naval officers,
Right? There's no way. Yeah, that would have... Now, Tony Scott actually gets fired from this movie 3 times.
On what cause?
So he had a couple of different things. Now, the budget was immense on this film.
Yeah.
They end up making it back, so because they were paying out to the Navy and everything. So the first time he ends up getting fired is him and Don Simpson and Bruckheimer had a different vision than I think Tony Scott did, and he had kind of this, like, basically what you see the opening is, like, that was his vision. They did not like it, did not want him to shoot it. So what he ends up doing is they want to see, you know, the dailies of it, essentially. He shoots it the way they want, and then he ends up shooting it the way he wants. Well, what ends up happening is the wrong dailies got sent back. He was trying to be deceptive with them, the wrong ones, and they end up firing him. But the problem was, he was on the ship, they couldn't get to him. So he just kept filming until they were able to get to him. Well, by the time they were figuring out how to get to him, he had already been filming the movie for another couple of days, so they finally let him to keep going. He ends up then getting fired because, as I'm not going to use the word he used, but essentially he said he made Kelly McGillis look beautiful in a certain type of way. The execs did not like that. They did not want that, so they had to. I think he compromised on that.
Got it. Okay.
And then the third had to do with the final scenes. He brought the visors down. I actually had to go back and look because I didn't even notice that the visors come down a little bit in the final fight scene. And his feeling was that they should. You have these big actors, you want their faces to be seen, so there was a little bit, but at that point they were pretty much done with the film. So, but he's kind of all over the place. Tom Cruise ended up telling a really interesting story about him at his funeral, unfortunately, which was, I guess, at the opening. So I guess what happened was he ends up having this vision of having the aircraft carrier there with the planes taking off and the sun and how it's setting and this whole idea. But the problem was the carrier was facing the wrong way for him to shoot this.
Oh no.
So he goes to the captain and asks them, how I want to turn the ship around. What do I need to do to get the ship turned around? The captain says it cost about $25,000 in gas to turn around. Tony Scott ends up writing the check on the spot for $25,000, and they turn the ship around, and he gets his shot, which pays off because the sun in this movie is
so important.
important.
But here's the thing: fight for your art, even if you have to write a $25,000 check. Fight for your art, because it's such an impressive way to end the film. And you're right, because you have those really wonderful opening shots, with the title sequencing, and the sun featuring so prominently. It adds that epic, like, larger than life scale that you need. It's being bathed in that warm sunset, like, is so important to understanding, like, the weight of that ship, and it makes it look great. And so what Tony Scott was doing was really, like, innovating for every, like, person on Instagram that wants to take photos at golden hour. Right. He already knew.
He was there.
Aircraft carriers look cuter during golden hour.
And that's why I think, I don't think Tony Scott gets nearly enough credit for why this film is still to this day so beloved.
Because it's the
Tom Cruise deserves all the credit. Do not get me wrong. He is Top Gun, he is Maverick, but Tony Scott is 1B to Tom Cruise's 1A of this film.
And I would almost flip the order. I think there's something about how this is shot. When we were preparing for this film, again, there's so much of, like, the fun aspects and so much of, like, the characters being so well acted and so rich and that really feeling that kinship, like, so deeply in the film. But I think what I came back to as I was watching this, it was like, these flight sequences are so immense. I know where I am in the sky. I'm not confused. I think there is a tendency in American action films to film everything so quickly so you kind of can't see the tricks, like, because that's the pace at which things happen, quote unquote. But I think there is such an intention to be like, yes, this is happening fast, but you are so anchored in where the action is happening and what is going on, and that's a credit to Tony Scott and the use of his resources. And also, he could be like an inspirational poster. They fire you once, just stay on set. They fire you twice, write a big check. Like, it's an incredible thing. And
inspiring.
And I think talking about the filmmaking style, so we have a new segment that we have added in this season called The Hold Up. What doesn't age well, what doesn't meet kind of like our societal standards now. I don't see a holdup for this film.
No, the happy thing about this movie is I didn't, rewatching it, I didn't catch anything that, I think it really, from that standpoint, holds up. I would say, maybe we could say, it's very 80s. It's hard not to say that. It's got that, which is fine. I also will yell that the holdup, Goose taking the Polaroid with the window and a flash, no way that picture came out when they were inverted.
Okay, we have found the holdup of the film. From a photography standpoint, it doesn't make sense. But I think that's what's great about this film. 80s films can fall into some really unfortunate traps and tropes that unfortunately mark a lot of the films that you probably grew up with loving, and then now you look back and go, oh gosh, that's horrifying. I think this film, for the most part, kind of skates by a lot of that, which is nice. And I'm so excited, because this film was nominated for some Academy Awards, so I do get to talk about the Oscars this episode.
The Oscars, which we'll stick with. So yeah, I mean, it's not only nominated, it wins one.
Which one does it win, Ryan?
We've been talking about the soundtrack, the entire movie. Of course it wins Best Song, although I think it shouldn't have.
You don't think Take My Breath Away deserved an Oscar?
It definitely... Glory of Love.
Oh, yeah, no, Glory of Love. Yeah, Glory of Love should have won. Sorry, Take My Breath Away, but Glory of Love.
Also in the running there was Somewhere Out There from American Tail.
My whole being just melted.
Right. 3 just amazing songs.
Yeah, that's a great year. I'd give the edge to Glory of Love. I think I'd put Take My Breath Away in my third spot.
Do you think Take My Breath Away should have gotten the nomination over Danger Zone?
Yeah.
Danger Zone was actually supposed to be done by Toto, and then Toto ends up not being able to do it, so that's how Kenny Loggins gets it.
I really hope that's somehow how Africa came together, but no, I think there's a, kind of grand tradition. Oscars love a ballad when they're nominating for songs, and especially in the 80s, so I think it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I think I could have seen Glory of Love winning. Was it nominated for anything else that year?
It did. It ends up being up for sound editing. Loses out to Platoon. This was the Platoon year. Yeah. Platoon ends up, weirdly though, which I was shocked by, it actually wasn't nominated on the score. Alien, Star Trek 4, The Mission, Round Midnight, Hoosiers, which Hoosiers didn't win, but should have.
Yeah, Hoosiers is a great score.
Director, we talked about Tony Scott a lot. He ends up, doesn't get nominated. Oliver Stone wins for Platoon that year. I was actually excited to see David Lynch had gotten nominated for Blue Velvet.
I think I understand, because I would say a film like this may have had more of a shot now than then getting nominated, because there is so many playful aspects of this. If this had played this straight, just kind of pilots in the air type film and didn't have some of the pop culture and the youthfulness to it, it may have actually snuck in for Best Director. It's a shame, though. I mean, that's just where the Oscars were at in the mid-'80s, though.
Yeah, Paul Newman ends up winning for Color of Money for acting.
Okay.
And then supporting actor, do we think that Anthony Edwards should have been in the discussion?
Yes, Goose is the heart of this movie.
Yeah, I'm a little disappointed. Dennis Hopper does not win for Hoosiers, although he was nominated. Michael Caine wins for Hannah and Her Sisters. So, yeah.
Dennis Hopper's performance in Hoosiers is just really upsetting.
Oh, it's right.
That's an episode for another time. I have a feeling Hoosiers will sneak its way into the podcast.
Random thing here, I gotta say, when looking over the Oscar nominations, Crocodile Dundee got a writing nomination. Crocodile Dundee.
You think that's a knife? This is a knife.
I believe that was actually part 2.
Oh, no.
We talked about that on one of our, nostalgia cinemas again, where we were like, do you remember a time when the Crocodile Dundee movies were just a thing?
They were big.
That was the number 2 movie in 1986 behind Top Gun.
I'm going to really be excited that Top Gun was the one that was number 1 when I was born, and not Crocodile Dundee, because I feel like the trajectory of my life would totally change.
There's some really big Paul Hogan fan right now yelling at their radio that we are not giving Crocodile Dundee enough credit.
Come at me, Dundee!
Also, Stand By Me didn't get a nomination for Best Picture. I'm going to argue and say that should have.
Yeah, no, it really should have. All-time classic film. And really well written, really well acted, and really well directed. That movie had everything. So we teased at the beginning we were going to talk about the how could you of this movie at the end. And this is kind of a different how could you. And so our how could you for this is, how could you make a sequel 35 years later?
right?
of this film. And, we are in an era and an age of something called the legacy sequel or the requel, which I think you believe you invented the term.
I feel like I'll show you the napkin. I believe I invented it.
But the legacy sequels have become like really big box office fodder. We see this with, film franchises like Scream and Halloween, Independence Day, Mad Max Fury Road, Bill and Ted, Doctor Sleep, which was the, legacy sequel to The Shining. One could even say that the newest trilogy of Star Wars certainly falls within that because there is such a large gap of time, although definitely not as large as like the film we're talking about. We've got an upcoming Hocus Pocus 2 sequel coming out, which obviously the nostalgia for Hocus Pocus has not died. It's only gained momentum with time, but this is a really interesting thing in Hollywood. Sequels tend to build momentum off of the first film comes out, it does really well, we make a sequel. I think we've all understood that to be a Hollywood formula. But this has emerged as the new formula, bringing back IP or stories or casts from films that came out 20, 30, 40 years prior from their original inception. So, Top Gun Maverick is allegedly coming out. I'll believe it.
We're in the final countdown on it now, finally.
No. They have been teasing this movie for so long at this point. But what are your thoughts on legacy sequels? Like them, don't like them?
Can I, though? What is the difference between a legacy sequel and a sequel?
Okay, so the legacy sequel plays on, I think, the idea of the terminology here of legacy sequel versus just calling it a sequel. Like, Scream is a really good example of this because there's been no break in the franchise. Like, there was a Scream 4 and then Scream 5. Let's please stop calling it just Scream, but Scream 5 came out a number of years later. So the idea is that your legacy sequel harkens back to the themes, the characters, the direct storylines of the first film. So, and I do not favor this argument, but people talking about Force Awakens being really comparable to New Hope is, I think, what puts it in that versus just calling it a sequel. I think legacy sequel explains how nostalgia kind of is driving actors and characters and storylines to come back in some form many years later. I mean, certainly we see this with Halloween 2018. I mean, there were many Halloween sequels, but they made it a direct sequel to the original film. Mad Max Fury Road, that was a series that went into all sorts of sequels, but now this thing came back and kind of like reinvented the franchise. So like, I think the line is thin, but I think it's all about time and how much weight the original story has in the new story they're telling.
Yeah, because I just think it's interesting thinking about Top Gun Maverick, which I literally like the title as obvious as it seems, because we've been talking so much about how Maverick is really the focus. The legacy sequel to me feels like it's a handoff, right? Like, you're bringing some old back to just hand it off to the new to take over. We'll wait to find out whether that ends up being what Top Gun Maverick is about, where these other films have. And then we have the reboot or the requels, which is essentially Halloween, which essentially the timeline was all screwed up. We have to just start over and pretend like certain things didn't happen. So they're very interesting. The cynical part of me at some point would have probably been like, no sequels, but some of these are really good and they're giving people what they want. And, we just talked about this again with Halloween Kills, and Halloween Kills isn't a very good movie, but a lot of us that love Halloween love that movie. It's, so you're kind of, you're feeding into your fan base, and there's a fine line to that, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it if there's a good story to tell. As for Top Gun Maverick, I believe at some point there had been a sequel kind of thought about, and then it fell apart, which would have been in the same vein of Maverick teaching a female fighter pilot. It never ended up coming to fruition, and now they had this. I know Val Kilmer and Tom Cruise both obviously were very big on wanting this to happen. So as long as, to me, the people involved are good with it, and not just a paycheck, and I don't think that's what, I'm behind it.
Well, and I agree with you. Like, I think there's a way of approaching this, like, this is cash grab, this is nostalgia grab, but like there's also a way of approaching this of going, it's it's telling the story and it's exposing the original story to a new generation, like a reason to get invested in it. Like, we both love The Shining. I have never, not once, not even an iota, have ever thought to myself, I kind of need a sequel though. And I obviously know that, Stephen King wrote a novel, wrote Dr. Sleep, but I never really thirsted for a film sequel. I never thirsted to really see the Dr. Sleep story. I just knew it existed in novel form. It was not something I had read. But when that came out, I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. And it comes out almost 40 years after the original film. So you have this sense of it's connecting back and it's bringing back into light the original. Not that I think The Shining has ever left the social conscience, but there's a way in which I think there can be something really interesting about, like, Top Gun Maverick's going to come out. It's being marketed very heavily. It's even got like a little emoji with the hashtag if you use it on social media, which says they are really pushing marketing for this. So is this going to encourage a new generation of movie lovers to watch the original Top Gun, to be able to know what the reference, and there are going to be a lot of references in Top Gun Maverick to the original film, even like really small things that I've already kind of seen within the trailer. So I think it's a win. Like, it's one of those things. I watched this Top Gun. The only thing that has me concerned is, are you going to be as finely crafted of a film as Top Gun? Because the thing I'll say is this. Dr. Sleep, no, it wasn't directed by Stanley Kubrick, but Mike Flanagan is a phenomenal director. And I would say that is a complete, not only homage to Kubrick's work, but also like pushing it in a new direction. It's a really well-crafted film. So I think that's just what I want to see. Like, the reason we love the originals is because they have something beyond nostalgia. There's fine filmmaking there. Please do that with all of your legacy sequels.
Yeah, and I think the exciting thing about Top Gun Maverick, what you're saying is exactly really what it all comes down to, right? All of us are going to groan when we hear a sequel to something we love. But as long as you're telling a good story, it's all it's about. You're going to win us over if at the end, because we're all going to go see it, we're all going to watch it, and if it's a good story and good filmmaking, then all of it's going to be forgiven. We're all going to be very excited to get that nostalgia boost, And I think what's interesting about Top Gun Maverick, and we'll wait to find out, but I think it's, it's a story that still makes sense right now. Like, it doesn't feel like it's something that is outdated that we're just bringing back. Like, I think that there's probably a story, to be said there. And so I'm come around to the sequels. I'm coming around to requels. And again, as long as it's being shepherded in by the right people for the right reasons, I'm all for it.
And I think, like, to us, it's like, well, like, what makes it, like, the right group of people? Well, people who are passionate about it and are fans. Right. Like, the people who care. Because we love the new Scream movie because it was people who are diehard fans. Ghostbusters Afterlife being directed by Ivan Reitman's son, Jason Reitman. Like, that's why it works. Cobra Kai having the original cast be, an integral part of that story being told is why it works. So I think I think it can be a really fun thing. I hear a lot of my students talking about Cobra Kai, and they did not grow up with the Karate Kid, I think, as presently as we did, but they love Cobra Kai. So to me, it keeps those things going. It keeps those films that otherwise could be niche. Oh, it's an 80s movie. It keeps it, like, within the pop culture, like, hemisphere. So I think it's a win, and we're very excited to see Top Gun.
And I will take a sequel, legacy sequel, requel, any day over a remake.
100% agree. Well, with that, if you're not following us on social media, please follow us at How Could You Podcast on Instagram, at How Could You Pod on Twitter. You can always send us suggestions or bids to watch Coda to howcouldyoupodcast@gmail.com. Our Nostalgia Cinema is going to be back on April 30th at the Civic Theater at 1 p.m. We are showing The Sandlot. Speak of nostalgia.
Just in time for baseball season to begin.
Yes. So we will be posting a lot about that. Please buy tickets, come out and support the theater. We're really excited to see you.
And until next time, remember, there are 2 C's in Tocci, boys, and enjoy the Odyssey.